Hello and welcome to Sharing Light. Thank you for joining us for this session today. We're joined by the senior pastor of the Sunshine Cathedral, the Reverend Dr. Durrell Watkins, and the topic of this session is baptism necessary? Is baptism necessary? And I'm going to add to that, how much water do you need?
Let's see. Is baptism necessary? No. Thank you for joining us again. It's you know I, Sometimes people will say, the most meaningful moment in my spiritual life was my baptism. Well, it's great if you remember it. If you were a baby, you probably didn't remember it. Baptism. First of all, when we're talking about Holy Communion, when we're talking about baptism, we're talking about sacraments.
Mm-hmm.
And sacraments are outward signs of inward events. They are outward signs of something that happens spiritually and internally. And so I don't think it's ever about the outward thing. Why is baptism magical and the shower you took this morning isn't? Or why is baptism magical but swimming in the Atlantic Ocean isn't? I mean, what is more magical, what is more mystical, what is more powerful and wonderful and beautiful than the Atlantic Ocean? If you can't have a spiritual experience swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, you're probably not very tuned into spirituality. And so what makes baptism so special? There were in Jesus' day and in his region and in that time, ritual cleansings were pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see the ministry of John the Baptizer. He has a ministry of just that sort of thing, of spiritual cleansing. And Jesus goes to John and has that experience. So because Jesus had that experience with John, because John had that entire ministry, it's become this tradition for followers of Jesus that it's a rite of passage. Whether you're born into Christianity, born into a Christian family, and are baptized as a baby, or whether you, as an adult or as a teenager, decide that you want to claim Christianity as your path, and so then you're baptized. It's not about the age, and it's not about the words, and it's not about the amount of water. It's a rite of passage, and rites of passage are important. Rites of passage celebrate important moments in our lives. Rites of passage help us mark moments in our lives where we grow or where we embrace new possibilities. And so baptism is as wonderful a ritual as any. And but is it necessary? Is necessary for what? Necessary to be a good person? Absolutely not. Necessary to be a spiritual person, to have a spiritual path? Of course not. In fact, in the segment where we talked about Holy Communion, we talked about the traditions that have spiritual communion. Those traditions tend to have spiritual baptism too, mm-hmm. which is where they don't have a ritual for it. It's what they want to be is they want to be spiritually renewed. They want to be internally cleansed of their fears, cleansed of their self-doubt, cleansed of whatever keeps them from celebrating their wholeness and believing in their unity with the divine. And so the rite of baptism or the sacrament of baptism, the amount of water used, the word said, that I can't believe that is necessary to anything. That doesn't mean it isn't important. It doesn't mean it isn't wonderful. It doesn't mean that it doesn't serve a good purpose. I personally love doing infant baptisms. I love saying, here is a new person in our community that's going to grow up in our community, and we all get to love this person into wholeness. And I always like to lift the baby up, and everyone applauds wildly, and it's a beautiful moment. Would that child have had a good life if I didn't do all those things? Very probably, And just because I did that, will that child never have any difficulties? Probably not. That's not how it works. I remember, to my knowledge, my grandfather was never baptized. And that tormented me as a kid because he died. And I remember praying that somehow, because I remember hearing that Jesus was the high priest. And so I remember praying that Jesus, as a high priest, would somehow, in that capacity, baptize my grandfather, in the heavens or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was the thinking of an immature thinking of a teenager. But I was so tormented that he hadn't been baptized. So I remember pleading that somehow that would magically happen anyway, and that he would be okay. Of course, at 45 years old, I don't think that my grandfather was in any danger because drops of water weren't sprinkled on his head by a priest saying certain words. That just seems silly to me now. And I remember even shortly thereafter being very comforted by the story of when Jesus is being executed and others are being executed, and one of the fellow rebels being executed that day says, "Remember me," and Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." There was no baptism. They were bound. I mean, there was no. He couldn't. There was no water around.
Words.
They were there. And there were no magic words. He just said, "Remember me," and he said, "You're okay." And so it's so baptism wasn't necessary for that thief, that rebel, on the cross. So I don't ever want to diminish that baptism is a beautiful ritual. I love rituals. I love drama. I love pageantry. I love rites of passage. Very important, very beautiful, very useful. Necessary. My cats haven't been baptized. My cats seem very happy and well cared for, and I think my cats are fully cats and are good cats and are having a full and wonderful cat-like life without baptism. And I think the same can be true for humans. We can have a fully human life, a wonderful human life. And of course, there are religions that don't have baptism rituals, and they are devout and love God or the God of their understanding, and so it's not necessary. And being not necessary doesn't mean that it isn't good and useful and beautiful and wonderful. So we're entitled to it. Traditionally, baptism is also a way of entering the church. That's one of the ways that you can enter the church. And we tell people here, we offer you that. But if for some reason you had some sort of reason that you had not been baptized and you did not want to be baptized, that would not prohibit you from being a part of this faith community. What baptism represents, it's an outward sign of an inward event. I can't judge whether or not you've had an inward event. And so if you say, for whatever reason, you want to be part of this faith community, you're in. And so it's not even necessary to call yourself a part of this faith community.
I want to go back to the ritual for just a moment, and I know we're probably getting a little close on time here, but you alluded to the fact that it is a ritual. How would you connect that to maybe even a coming out story, as a baptism ritual for coming out? Because some people see that as a new birth or a new beginning or something beginning in their life. How would you connect that as a coming out?
We saw a ritual one time where a person was coming out as a trans man, and they had a baptism using as this new identity as a trans man, using his new male name, and instead of using water, they used testosterone, a vial of testosterone. And it was a powerful ritual, and people wept, and the person involved wept, and it was a powerful ritual. So yes, it can be powerful. Again, was it necessary that trans man would have been a trans man in any case? It was useful, it was wonderful, it was powerful, it was beautiful. And so I think that's what Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. Religion is made for us, not us for religion. We can use religion in ways that are empowering and celebratory and wonderful, and as long as that's what it is, it's useful, and we get to use it as a tool, and it's fabulous. But when we become enslaved to it, then it's lost its relevance, and that's not what it's for. So if baptism is something that helps us celebrate life, and it's something that we want to do, and it's something that helps us love life and celebrate the goodness of life, then let's have it. But let's not ever call it necessary. There's very little in life that is necessary. The prophet Micah said, "This is all that's required of you," and that is to love God and is to love justice and mercy and live humbly with your God. And I think he got it right, and I think that's still true, that there's very little that is necessary, and rituals aren't on the list.
I think you mentioned, and this may be a topic for another session, certainly, about what it meant. You used the word slave, and I just quickly went to what baptism meant in antiquity around slavery and in baptism, and how that was a sign of ownership and those who were in and those who were out. So,
in colonization, a lot of people were baptized basically at the end of a sword, and so baptism was it could be seen as an oppressive thing, but that's because it was forced on them.
Right.
And when we say baptism is necessary, that is almost like saying this has to be forced on you,
Right.
and that isn't liberative. But if it's something you choose, if it's something to celebrate life and it's something that brings you joy, let's have it, let's offer it, let's do it, let's have a good time with it. But I would never say it's necessary.
Right. All right. Thank you, and thank you for joining us at this segment of talking about is baptism necessary. Thank you for joining us for another great episode of Sharing the Light. Tell your friends about this online ministry, and when you're in Southeast Florida, make sure you worship with us on a Sunday at the 9 a.m., the 10:30 a.m., or the 6 p.m. service. And now for a final word from our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Durrell Watkins.
Email me at Durrell@sunshinecathedral.net if you have a religious question or if you'd like to subscribe to our daily devotional magazine, Spirit and Truth. We'll send it anywhere in the United States for an annual donation of any size. You can also email us prayer requests, or you can make donations on our website, www.sunshinecathedral.org. You'll also want to check out our great performing arts series, religious education classes, conferences, and other exciting activities. For now, we wish you many blessings on your spiritual journey.